This is a multi-purpose wood cutting blade. It has 60 teeth and they're carbide tipped. You can use this to cut plywood, masonite, MDF, particle board, OSB. This is a multi-purpose blade with 60 teeth. They're carbide tipped, and I use it for cutting sheet goods like this plywood. This is a piece of mahogany, OSB or oriented striated board, and MDF or medium density fiberboard. So for example, if I wanted to cut a 2-inch strip off of this piece of MDF, I would set the blade height and then adjust my fence. And you want to make sure it cuts on the inside if you're cutting 2 inches off. You can also use this blade to do a cross cut using the miter gauge on a table saw. You would just set your angle, in this case it's 90 degrees, and put the miter gauge in the slot on the table saw and align your work with the saw blade. To cut a 45-degree miter on a table saw, I would use this miter gauge and set it for 45 degrees. I'm using this multi-purpose blade, which would be perfect for this. To cut an angle on a piece of wood like this is spruce, I would use the miter box and a carbide tipped multi-purpose blade like this 60 tooth job here. I'd set the angle on my miter gauge and align the saw blade with the mark. To make compound cuts, you can also use this miter box and tilt the blade this way and set your miter at the appropriate angle. This is a blade that I would use for ripping. It has large notches and carbide teeth. It has 20 teeth and makes a very good cut. So ripping is a process where you cut a 2x4 or similar dimensional lumber with the grain. So in this direction. You can see I've installed the rip blade in the table saw, and I'm going to cut this 2x4. Basically want to raise the level of the blade just above the 2x4. Like so. I'm going to show you how to cut this 2x4. This is a cross cut. Basically measure your length, make a mark with a pencil, and I like to continue that mark with a square across the board. This is a miter saw, and I'm going to use it to cross cut this 2x4. Basically I have a universal saw blade in here which has about 60 teeth, carbide tipped. So I basically just align the blade with the mark and cut. You can see it's a pretty clean cut, relatively square. I use this chop box, as it's called in the industry, for rough cuts. This is a zero clearance insert, and it comes completely flat, and you cut the slot into it for your saw, and it allows you to cut very thin strips with your guide without the piece falling through the slot. This is the blade that I use for some types of sheet plastic. It has 200 teeth and they're very fine teeth. It's a 10-inch blade for my table saw, and it's also used for cutting plywood. And I use it to cut things like PETG, PETG, acrylic. This is 1/4-inch black acrylic, black ABS, and white 1/8-inch ABS. For cutting certain types of plastic, I use this multi-tooth blade. It's also used for plywood, but for thin sheet material like this PETG, this is what I use. This is a piece of plastic. It's actually a poured resin, and we have alternating transparency and opaque. And it's basically a plastic, so I'm going to use a plastic blade. This is the blade I'm going to use to cut the plastic, and it has 50 teeth. They're very sharp carbide teeth, and the blade is designed to cut plastic. This is the thin slice of plastic which I cut off the block, and as you can see, there's very few marks from the saw blade. It makes a really fine, smooth cut. Larger pieces of plastic, such as this piece of nylon, this acrylic, and this black Delrin, can also be cut on a table saw or miter box. For that, I would use a blade like this 50-tooth carbide tipped blade. It's a combination blade, but is designed for cutting plastic.